After 30 years of sacrificing everything for my daughter, she looked me straight in the eye at her wedding rehearsal dinner and told 300 guests that I was the most embarrassing thing that had ever happened to her. So I quietly changed my will, liquidated my assets, and disappeared from her life forever. What she discovered 6 months later left her begging strangers on social media to help her find me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined that the proudest moment of my life would also become the most humiliating. There I was, 62 years old, sitting at the head table of the grand ballroom at the Riverside Country Club, wearing the navy blue dress I'd saved for 6 months to buy. My daughter Victoria was getting married to Jonathan, a successful architect from one of the most prominent families in our city of Cedar Falls. The rehearsal dinner was everything Victoria had dreamed of. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk. Each centerpiece a masterpiece of white roses and baby's breath that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. The guest list read like a who's who of Cedar Falls society. Politicians, business owners, country club members, and old money families whose names were etched into the foundation stones of our town's most prestigious buildings. I should have felt out of place, and deep down, I suppose I did. My husband Robert had passed away 8 years earlier, leaving me with a modest teacher's pension and the small house on Maple Street where Victoria had grown up. While the other parents at this gathering owned vacation homes and luxury cars, I drove the same reliable Honda Civic I'd been driving for 12 years. But none of that mattered to me that night, because my baby girl was happy. Victoria looked absolutely radiant in her champagne-colored cocktail dress, her auburn hair swept up in an elegant chignon that had probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had always belonged in rooms like this, graciously accepting congratulations and air kisses from women whose approval she'd been seeking since high school. I had worked 3 jobs to put her through private school, then took out loans I was still paying off to send her to Northwestern University. Every sacrifice had been worth it. Watching her succeed in her marketing career, seeing her confidence bloom, witnessing her engagement to a man who clearly adored her. Robert would have been so proud. The evening had been going beautifully. Jonathan's father, Charles Whitmore, had given a touching speech about welcoming Victoria into their family. Victoria's matron of honor, her college roommate Rebecca, had shared amusing stories about their adventures in Chicago. The champagne flowed freely, laughter echoed through the ballroom, and I felt a deep sense of accomplishment watching my daughter in her element. Then came time for Victoria to speak. She stood gracefully, champagne flute in hand, her smile bright as camera flashes captured the moment. I remember feeling my heart swell with pride as she began thanking everyone for being part of their special weekend. She thanked Jonathan's parents for their generosity in hosting the rehearsal dinner. She thanked her bridesmaids for their friendship and support. She thanked her colleagues for taking time away from their busy schedules. Then she paused, and for a moment I thought she was going to thank me. I thought she might acknowledge the sacrifices, the late nights I'd spent grading papers to pay for her dance lessons, the weekend shifts I'd worked at the department store to afford her college application fees. I thought she might mention how proud her father would have been. Instead, what came out of her mouth changed everything between us forever. And finally, Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, I want to apologize to all of you for my mother's behavior tonight. The words hit me like a physical blow. 300 faces turned toward me as conversation stopped mid-sentence. I felt my cheeks burning as Victoria continued, her tone light and joking, as if she were sharing an amusing anecdote rather than humiliating the woman who had raised her. As many of you know, my mother Eleanor has always been a bit embarrassing. She insists on taking pictures. With that ancient camera of hers, she asks way too many personal questions, and she has this unfortunate habit of telling everyone about my childhood accomplishments that really aren't appropriate dinner conversation. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I sat frozen in my chair, my champagne glass halfway to my lips, unable to process what was happening. The camera she was mocking was my father's vintage Nikon, a treasure I'd kept after his death because it took the most beautiful portraits. The questions she found embarrassing were my genuine interest in getting to know the people who mattered to her. The childhood stories were my attempts to share my pride in the remarkable woman she'd become. I've spent most of my adult life learning how to apologize for where I come from. Victoria continued, her voice gaining confidence as more people laughed. The tiny house on the wrong side of town. The discount store clothes. The teachers. Lounge potluck contributions instead of catered affairs. I know it's been awkward for many of you who've had to interact with her over the years. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. Around me I could see expressions ranging from uncomfortable sympathy to barely concealed amusement. These people, many of whom I'd met for the first time that evening, were being told by my own daughter that I was something to be ashamed of. But tomorrow, Victoria said, raising her glass higher, tomorrow I become Mrs. Jonathan Whitmore, and I can finally stop making excuses for my background. I can finally be the person I was meant to be, without having to worry about being embarrassed by my family's limitations. The applause that followed was polite but awkward. I noticed several people avoiding eye contact with me, clearly uncomfortable with what they'd just witnessed. Others seemed to be studying me with new interest, probably wondering what other embarrassing behaviors they might observe. Jonathan looked mortified. I saw him whisper something urgent in Victoria's ear, but she just smiled and shrugged it off. Mrs. Whitmore, Jonathan's mother, caught my eye from across the table and offered a small, sympathetic smile that somehow made everything worse. Even strangers felt sorry for me. I managed to maintain my composure through the rest of the evening, but inside, something fundamental had broken. This wasn't teenage rebellion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was my 30-year-old daughter, deliberately and publicly, rejecting everything I had given her, everything I was, everything we had been together. When people approached me afterward, they did so with the careful tone reserved for accident victims. "Eleanor, you must be so proud," they'd say, but their eyes held pity instead of genuine warmth. I smiled and nodded and played the role of the gracious mother, but every interaction felt like another small cut. The drive home to my little house on Maple Street had never felt longer. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes after turning off the engine, staring at the modest two-bedroom home where Victoria had learned to ride a bicycle, where she'd practiced piano recitals, where she'd cried over her first heartbreak, the house where Robert and I had dreamed of grandchildren visiting for holidays, where we'd planned to grow old watching our family expand. Inside, I walked through rooms filled with memories that suddenly felt tainted. Victoria's graduation photos on the mantelpiece seemed to mock me. The refrigerator, still covered with her childhood artwork and achievement certificates, felt like a museum of my own naivete. I'd kept everything, treasured every milestone, celebrated every success as if it belonged to both of us. But apparently, it had never belonged to both of us. I had been an embarrassment she was eager to leave behind. I sat at my kitchen table that night, still wearing my carefully chosen navy dress, and tried to understand where I had gone wrong. Had I been too enthusiastic about her achievements? Had I asked inappropriate questions at social gatherings? Had I somehow failed to understand the unspoken rules of the world she'd entered? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't really about my behavior at all. This was about Victoria's fundamental shame about her origins, about the life we'd built together, about me. She wasn't just embarrassed by what I did. She was embarrassed by who I was. I thought about Robert lying in his hospital bed during those final weeks, making me promise to take care of our little girl. "She's going to do amazing things, Ellie," he'd whispered, his voice weak but his eyes bright with pride. "Just make sure she never forgets where she came from." I'd kept the first part of that promise. Victoria had indeed done amazing things. But somewhere along the way, I'd failed at the second part. She had not only forgotten where she came from, she actively despised it. The wedding was the next evening. I had planned to wear the rose-colored dress I'd found on sale at Nordstrom Rack, the one that made me feel elegant and appropriate for such a grand occasion. I had prepared a small speech in case I was asked to say a few words, something heartfelt about watching Victoria grow into the wonderful woman she'd become. I had even practiced walking in the low heels I'd bought specifically for the event. But as dawn broke over Cedar Falls, I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit in that church, surrounded by people who now saw me as Victoria's embarrassing burden. I couldn't smile for photos that would probably be cropped to minimize my presence. I couldn't pretend that my heart wasn't shattered into pieces. Instead, I did something I'd never done in 30 years of motherhood. I let my daughter down. I called the florist and had a beautiful arrangement of white lilies delivered to the church with a note. "Wishing you a lifetime of happiness. All my love, Mom." Then I turned off my phone, drew the curtains, and spent my daughter's wedding day mourning the relationship I thought we'd had. The aftermath was swift and predictable. Angry voicemails from Victoria demanding to know where I was. Concerned calls from the few friends we had in common. A text message from Jonathan that was surprisingly kind, saying he hoped I was okay and that they'd missed me at the ceremony. But it was Victoria's final message that confirmed what I already knew in my heart. "Mother, your dramatic absence was exactly the kind of attention-seeking behavior I was talking about. You've managed to make my wedding day about you after all. I'm not surprised, just disappointed that you couldn't put aside your hurt feelings for one day to support your only daughter." She saw my absence as manipulation rather than self-preservation. She interpreted my withdrawal as an attack rather than a retreat. The woman I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, truly believed that I was capable of sabotaging her happiness out of petty vindictiveness. That's when I knew there was no coming back from this. The next morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable just days before. I called my lawyer, Margaret Stevens, who had handled Robert's estate and our family's legal matters for years. Margaret had known Victoria since she was a little girl, had watched her grow up, had even helped with some of the legal paperwork for her college applications. "Eleanor," Margaret said when I walked into her office, "I heard about the wedding situation. How are you holding up?" I appreciated that she didn't pretend everything was normal. Margaret had always been direct, which was exactly what I needed that day. "I need to change my will," I said without preamble. Margaret's eyebrows rose, but she didn't try to talk me out of it. That's why I'd always liked her. She listened first.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Judged later. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said, pulling out a legal pad. I told her everything. The rehearsal dinner speech, the years of gradual distancing, the growing sense that Victoria was ashamed of our life together. I explained how her words had made me realize that I'd been living under an illusion, believing we had a close relationship when in reality, I'd been an obligation she was counting down the days to escape. "Victoria is financially secure," I said. "She has her career, her husband's family wealth, her expensive education that I provided. What she doesn't have is any appreciation for where those opportunities came from. She's made it clear that she considers me an embarrassment, something to be overcome rather than cherished." Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor, this is a major decision. Are you sure you don't want to take some time to think about it? Maybe talk to Victoria first?" What would I say to her, Margaret? That her public humiliation of me hurt my feelings? That I'd appreciate a little gratitude for the sacrifices I made? She's 30 years old. If she doesn't understand by now what I gave up for her, having a conversation isn't going to change anything. What did you have in mind for the new will? I had spent the entire sleepless night thinking about this. I want everything to go to charity. The house, the savings, the life insurance policy Robert left, everything. I want it divided between 3 organizations: the Teachers, Scholarship Fund at Cedar Falls High School, the Children's Hospital where Victoria was born, and the Animal Rescue League, where Robert and I used to volunteer. Margaret wrote down the details, then looked up at me with concern. "That's a significant estate, Eleanor. Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I've never been more certain of anything. Victoria has made it clear that she doesn't value what I've built or who I am. She won't miss the inheritance because she doesn't need it. And frankly, she doesn't deserve it." "What about other family members, cousins, nieces, nephews?" "My sister Patricia died 2 years ago. Robert's family lives in Oregon and we barely keep in touch. Victoria is my only immediate family, and she's chosen to treat me like a burden rather than a blessing. Margaret completed the paperwork with her usual efficiency. The new will was comprehensive and ironclad. Everything I owned, everything Robert and I had worked for during our 35-year marriage, would go to help people who might actually appreciate it. Teachers trying to further their education, sick children who needed medical care, abandoned animals looking for homes. As I signed the documents, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time since the rehearsal dinner, I felt like I was taking control of my own life, instead of being a passive victim of my daughter's cruelty. But changing my will was only the first step. The more I thought about Victoria's words, the more I realized she'd actually given me a gift, though not the kind she'd intended. She'd shown me that the life I'd been living, the constant worry about her approval, the endless attempts to bridge the gap between our different worlds, was making me miserable. She wanted to be free of her embarrassing mother? Fine. I'd give her exactly what she wanted. Over the next 2 weeks, I began planning what I started thinking of as my great disappearance. Not suicide, nothing dramatic or harmful, but a complete transformation of my life into something that belonged entirely to me. I started by researching places I'd always wanted to visit, but never could because I was saving money for Victoria's needs. Places like Asheville, North Carolina, with its arts community and mountain views. Santa Fe, New Mexico, with its galleries and adobe architecture. Coastal Maine, with its rocky shores and literary history. I looked into volunteer opportunities that would let me use my teaching skills in meaningful ways. Literacy programs for adults who'd never learned to read. English classes for immigrants trying to build new lives. Tutoring programs for children whose parents couldn't afford extra help. Most importantly, I started imagining a life where I didn't have to apologize for who I was or worry about embarrassing anyone. A life where my curiosity about other people would be seen as warmth rather than intrusiveness. Where my modest background would be a source of strength rather than shame. Victoria called twice during this planning period, both times wanting to discuss what she called my tantrum at her wedding. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk to her, and honestly, I wasn't sure I ever would be ready. What she'd said hadn't been spoken in anger or stress. It had been calculated and deliberate. She'd used her wedding as a platform to publicly reject me, and that wasn't something I could easily forgive or forget. Instead, I focused on the practical aspects of my new life. I contacted a realtor about putting the house on the market. I researched how to transfer my pension benefits to a different state. I began sorting through 30 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. Going through Victoria's childhood room was the hardest part. Her debate team trophies, her honor roll certificates, her homecoming photos, all the evidence of the bright, kind, ambitious girl I thought I'd raised. I packed everything carefully into boxes and stored them in the basement. Someday, if we ever reconciled, she might want these memories. If we didn't, well, they'd be someone else's problem to deal with after I was gone. 3 weeks after the wedding, I found the perfect opportunity. A teaching position had opened up at a small private school in Carmel by the Sea, California. The job was working with children who had learning disabilities, helping them develop confidence and academic skills. The salary was modest, but it came with a small cottage on the school grounds and the kind of purpose I'd been missing since retiring from public education 2 years earlier. I applied immediately and was offered the position after a phone interview. The headmaster, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, said my experience and references were exactly what they were looking for. She seemed genuinely excited about having me join their team. The house sold faster than I'd expected, to a young couple who loved its character and charm. They were starting their own family and spoke about their plans with the same excitement Robert and I had felt when we'd first moved in 30 years earlier. It felt right, passing our little house on to people who would appreciate it and fill it with new memories. I kept only what would fit in my Honda Civic and a small moving truck. Everything else, I donated or gave away. Neighbors were amazed at my generosity, not knowing it was actually relief. Every possession I released felt like shedding weight I'd been carrying without realizing it. The hardest conversation was with Margaret, my lawyer, when I came to sign the final paperwork for the house sale. "Eleanor, have you told Victoria about any of this?" "About the move? The will change. Anything? No, and I don't plan to. She's gonna find out eventually. When she tries to contact you, when she realizes you've moved, she'll figure it out the same way she's figured out everything else in her adult life, without my help. Margaret looked troubled. I understand you're hurt, but she's still your daughter. Maybe she'll come around. Maybe she'll realize how badly she handled things. Maybe she will. But I'm not going to spend whatever years I have left waiting for her to decide I'm worth loving. I'm 62 years old, Margaret. If I'm going to have a life that belongs to me instead of being defined by someone else's expectations, I need to start now. The night before I left Cedar Falls, I did one final thing. I wrote Victoria a letter. Not an explanation or an apology, just a simple note letting her know that I was moving on with my life. I didn't tell her where I was going or why. I didn't express anger or disappointment. I simply told her that I loved her, that I hoped she'd be happy, and that she shouldn't worry about me because I was going to be fine. I left the letter with Margaret, along with instructions that it should only be given to Victoria if she actively sought me out. If she never asked about me, if she simply accepted my absence as another embarrassment avoided, then she'd never see it. Then I loaded my car, took one last look at the house where I'd raised my daughter and loved my husband, and drove west toward whatever came next. The 6-hour drive to Chicago, where I'd catch a flight to California, gave me plenty of time to think. I thought about Robert and how proud he'd been of Victoria's accomplishments. I thought about all the sacrifices that had felt meaningful when I believed they were building something together. I thought about the future I'd imagined, with grandchildren and holiday gatherings, and the simple comfort of being needed by the people you love most. But mostly, I thought about freedom. For 30 years, every decision I'd made had been filtered through how it would affect Victoria. Every dollar I'd spent, every opportunity I'd considered, every choice about my own life had been secondary to her needs and wants. I'd defined myself as her mother first and Eleanor Wilson second, sometimes forgetting there was an Eleanor Wilson at all. Victoria's cruel words at the rehearsal dinner had inadvertently set me free. She'd made it clear that she didn't want or need my sacrifice anymore. She'd released me from the obligation I'd carried for 3 decades, and while the method had been devastating, the result might actually be liberating. As I reached the outskirts of Chicago, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about my own future. Curiosity about what kind of person I might become when I wasn't constantly worried about disappointing or embarrassing someone else. Anticipation about discoveries and adventures, and the possibility of happiness that belonged entirely to me. For the first time since the rehearsal dinner, I smiled. Victoria had wanted me to disappear from her life? She was about to get exactly what she'd asked for. The cottage in Carmel by the Sea was everything Dr. Martinez had promised. Small but perfectly appointed, with a kitchen that overlooked a garden and a living room with built-in bookshelves that reached the ceiling. The school was only a 5-minute walk through a path lined with cypress trees, and the ocean was close enough that I could hear the waves when I opened my windows at night. My students were remarkable. Children who'd struggled in traditional classrooms but who blossomed with individual attention and creative teaching methods. Kids like Tommy, who'd been labeled learning disabled until we discovered he was actually gifted but needed to process information differently. Like Sarah, whose dyslexia had made her feel stupid until she realized that many successful people shared her challenges. For the first time in decades, I was using my skills and passion in exactly the way I dreamed of when I first became a teacher. No bureaucracy, no standardized testing pressure, just the pure joy of watching children discover their own potential. I made friends easily in my new community. Other teachers who shared my dedication to education. Artists who appreciated my genuine interest in their work. Retirees who'd come to Carmel for the same reasons I had, seeking beauty and peace in their later years. People who saw my curiosity about their lives as a gift rather than an intrusion. Nobody knew about Victoria. Nobody knew about the public humiliation, or the broken relationship, or the will that had been changed. I was simply Eleanor Wilson, a new teacher who'd moved to California for a fresh start. My past existed only in my memory, and for the first time in my adult life, I was free to be exactly who I was without apologizing for it. 3 months passed before I thought about Victoria at all. Not that I'd forgotten her, but the constant worry and hurt had faded into something quieter. I'd built a new routine, new relationships, new sources of meaning and joy. I was busy enough and content enough that the pain of our estrangement became manageable background noise rather than the dominant theme of every day. Then, one evening in November, as I was grading papers in my cozy cottage while rain pattered against the windows, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was from Cedar Falls. I almost didn't answer. I'd been successfully avoiding reminders of my old life, and I wasn't ready to let that peace be disturbed. But something made me pick up. Eleanor Wilson? The voice was female, young, uncertain. Yes. Ms. Wilson, my name is Amanda Rodriguez. I'm a reporter with the Cedar Falls Tribune. I'm working on a story about missing persons cases, and your daughter Victoria Whitmore has contacted us asking for help locating you. My stomach dropped. Victoria was looking for me. After 3 months of silence, she'd decided she needed to find me. I'm not missing, I said carefully. I moved to California for a new job. I'm not hiding from anyone. Ma'am, I understand this might be sensitive, but Mrs. Whitmore says she's been trying to reach you for months. She says you disappeared without telling anyone where you were going, and she's very concerned about your welfare. Concerned about my welfare. The irony was almost funny. The daughter who'd publicly humiliated me, who'd called me embarrassing in front of 300 people, who'd made it clear that my presence in her life was a burden she couldn't wait to shed, was now claiming to be worried about me. What exactly does Victoria want? I asked. Amanda hesitated. She asked me to help her create a social media campaign to locate you. She's offering a reward for information about your whereabouts. She says she just wants to know that you're safe. A social media campaign. A reward. Victoria was turning my disappearance into a public spectacle, probably garnering sympathy as the worried daughter whose unstable mother had vanished without a trace. I could imagine the posts now, carefully crafted to make her look like the victim of my unreasonable behavior. Ms. Rodriguez, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. I appreciate your concern, but I'm exactly where I want to be. I'm not missing, I'm not in danger, and I don't need to be found. If my daughter is genuinely concerned about my welfare, she can contact my lawyer, Margaret Stevens, in Cedar Falls. Margaret has my contact information and can confirm that I'm fine. Would you be willing to speak with Mrs. Whitmore directly? I think she'd be very relieved to hear from you. I thought about Victoria's voice at the rehearsal dinner, confident and dismissive, as she apologized to her guests for my embarrassing existence. I thought about her text message after the wedding, accusing me of attention-seeking behavior. I thought about 3 months of complete silence from the daughter who now claimed to be desperately worried about me. No, I said. I wouldn't. Please don't contact me about this again. I hung up and sat in my quiet cottage, listening to the rain and trying to process what had just happened. Victoria was looking for me, but not because she missed me or regretted her words. She was looking for me because my absence was probably causing complications in her new life. Questions from Jonathan's family about where her mother had gone. Awkward explanations about why I wasn't around for holidays or special occasions. Or maybe she'd learned about the will. I called Margaret the next morning, and she confirmed my suspicions. Eleanor, I'm glad you called. Victoria has been here 3 times in the past month, demanding information about your whereabouts. I've told her repeatedly that I can't and won't share your contact information without your permission, but she's becoming increasingly agitated. Has she said why she wants to find me? Margaret was quiet for a moment. She found out about the will change. My heart started beating faster. How? She came to my office asking about your estate planning, claiming she needed to understand her inheritance for tax purposes related to her marriage. I couldn't give her specific details, but I had to tell her that significant changes had been made to your will since her wedding. So that was... Victoria wasn't concerned about my welfare. She was concerned about her inheritance. The woman who'd spent her wedding rehearsal talking about how embarrassing I was had suddenly discovered a deep need to reconnect with me once she learned that my money might not be coming her way. What did you tell her? I told her that if she wanted information about your current will, she'd need to speak with you directly. That's when she started demanding your contact information. And when you wouldn't give it to her, that's when she went to the newspaper. She's also posted on several social media platforms asking for help finding you. The posts are getting a lot of attention, Eleanor. People are sharing them, offering to help search for you. She's managed to make this look like a genuine missing person case. I felt sick. Victoria was manipulating public sympathy to pressure me into contact, probably hoping that community pressure would force me to reveal my location. She was using the same tactics she'd always used when she wanted something, making herself look like the victim of someone else's unreasonable behavior. Margaret, I need you to do something for me. What's that? I need you to give Victoria the letter I left with you, and I need you to tell her, officially and on the record, that I'm alive, I'm well, I've moved to California for a new job, and I don't wish to be contacted by her or anyone acting on her behalf. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? Once I give her that letter, there's no going back. She'll know exactly how you feel about what happened at the wedding. I thought about my students in Carmel, about the life I'd built that was entirely my own, about the peace I'd found in a place where nobody saw me as an embarrassment or a burden. I'm sure it's time Victoria learned that actions have consequences, even when the actions are words that can't be taken back. I'll handle it today. And Margaret? If she contests the will or tries to claim I'm mentally incompetent, I want you to know that I've never been more clear-headed in my life. I'm happy here. I'm useful here. I'm appreciated here. This isn't about revenge. It's about choosing to invest my resources in people and causes that value what I have to offer. After I hung up, I sat in my garden with a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise over the Pacific. In a few hours, Victoria would receive my letter and learn exactly why I'd disappeared from her life. She'd understand that her words at the rehearsal dinner had consequences she'd never anticipated. She'd realize that the inheritance she'd apparently been counting on was going to help people who might actually appreciate it. But mostly, she'd learn that the embarrassing mother she'd wanted to disappear had done exactly that, and that getting what you wish for isn't always the blessing you expect it to be. The letter Margaret delivered to Victoria was simple and direct. I'd written it the night before leaving Cedar Falls, when my pain was still fresh but my resolve was absolute. Victoria, by the time you read this, I'll be starting a new life in a place where I'm appreciated for who I am, rather than apologized for. Your words at the rehearsal dinner made it clear that you consider me an embarrassment and a burden. You wished for a life where you didn't have to make excuses for your family's limitations. I've decided to give you exactly what you wanted. You'll never have to be embarrassed by me again, because I won't be part of your life anymore. I hope you find the happiness and social acceptance you've been seeking. I'm confident you will, since the primary obstacle to your satisfaction has removed itself. Love always, Mom. Margaret called me that evening to report on Victoria's reaction. She read the letter twice, then asked if I knew exactly where you were. When I told her I couldn't share that information, she became very upset. She said the letter made it sound like you're never coming back. What did you tell her? I told her that was a conversation she'd need to have with you directly, if you ever chose to have it. How did she respond to that? Margaret sighed. She said she didn't understand why you were being so dramatic about a few words spoken at an emotional time. She said you were taking everything out of context and being unreasonably sensitive. Even now, even after learning that her words had driven me to completely rebuild my life, Victoria couldn't acknowledge the cruelty of what she'd done. She was still framing my response as an overreaction rather than recognizing the devastating impact of her public rejection. She also asked about the will. Margaret continued. She wanted to know if there was any way to contest the changes. And? I explained that you were mentally competent when you made the changes, that the will was properly executed, and that your reasons for the changes were well documented. Unless she can prove undue influence or mental incapacity, the will stands as written. I felt a grim satisfaction. Victoria had gambled with our relationship, assuming that my love for her would always override any hurt she caused me. She'd assumed that no matter how badly she treated me, I'd always be there, always be grateful for whatever scraps of affection she threw my way. She'd learned too late that even unconditional love has limits. Over the next few months, I heard occasional updates through Margaret. Victoria had tried several more approaches to finding me, including hiring a private investigator and reaching out to Robert's distant relatives in Oregon. She'd maintained her social media campaign for weeks, generating sympathy and search efforts from people who believed they were helping reunite a worried daughter with her missing mother. But I remained hidden in plain sight in Carmel, teaching children who needed me, building friendships with people who valued me, creating a life that was rich and meaningful, and entirely my own. Victoria could search for me as long as she wanted, but she was looking for someone who no longer existed. The woman who would sacrifice everything for her daughter's approval, who would endure any humiliation to maintain their relationship, who would apologize for her very existence if it made Victoria's life easier. That woman was gone. In her place was Eleanor Wilson, a teacher who specialized in helping children overcome learning challenges, a woman who lived in a cottage by the sea and had discovered that she was perfectly capable of creating happiness without anyone's permission or approval. Victoria had gotten exactly what she'd wished for at that rehearsal dinner. She had successfully escaped her embarrassing family background. She was free to be Mrs. Jonathan Whitmore without any inconvenient reminders of where she'd come from, or who had sacrificed to get her there. The only problem was that freedom came with a price she'd never expected to pay, and now, 6 months too late, she was finally beginning to understand what she'd lost. But understanding and acknowledging are two different things, and some lessons come too late to matter. The first sign that Victoria's perfect new life wasn't as secure as she'd imagined came on a Tuesday morning in February, exactly 8 months after I'd disappeared from Cedar Falls. I was in my classroom helping Sarah practice reading aloud when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Eleanor Wilson, this is Jonathan Whitmore. I got your number from your lawyer. Victoria doesn't know I'm contacting you. We need to talk. It's urgent." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart racing despite my efforts to stay calm. Jonathan, Victoria's husband, was reaching out to me behind her back. The man who had looked mortified during Victoria's rehearsal dinner speech was apparently dealing with consequences I hadn't anticipated. I waited until after school to respond, sitting in my cottage garden with a cup of tea and the sound of ocean waves in the background. The life I'd built in Carmel felt so peaceful, so removed from the drama I'd left behind, that Jonathan's message seemed like an intrusion from another world. "I'm well and happy in my new life. Whatever is happening with Victoria is between you and her. I wish you both the best, but I've moved on." His response came within minutes. "Mrs. Wilson, I understand your position, but you need to know what's been happening. Victoria has become obsessed with finding you. It's affecting her health, our marriage, everything. I'm not asking you to come back, but could we talk for just a few minutes? Please?" I set my phone down and walked to the edge of my garden, where I could see the Pacific stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The life I'd found here was exactly what I'd hoped for when I left Cedar Falls. My students adored me, my colleagues respected me, and I discovered parts of myself that had been buried under decades of worry about Victoria's needs and opinions. But Jonathan's message suggested that my disappearance had created ripple effects I hadn't considered. Despite everything Victoria had done, despite the will I'd changed and the letter I'd left, I couldn't completely shut off 30 years of maternal concern. Not for Victoria, necessarily, but for the innocent people who might be caught in the aftermath of our broken relationship. I called the number Jonathan had texted from. "Mrs. Wilson?" His voice was strained, exhausted in a way that made him sound older than his 32 years. "What's going on, Jonathan?" "Thank you for calling. I know this is complicated, but I didn't know who else to turn to." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "Victoria hasn't been the same since you left. At first she was angry, saying you were being dramatic and childish. But as the months went by and she couldn't find you, something changed." "What do you mean, changed?" "She's become completely fixated on locating you. She spends hours every day on social media, posting about you, following up on leads that go nowhere. She's hired 3 different private investigators. She's driven to every town within a 500-mile radius of Cedar Falls, thinking you might be hiding nearby." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. "Jonathan, I'm not hiding. I moved to California for a new job. Your wife could have found that out months ago if she'd simply called the school district where I used to work. They have my forwarding address for my pension. That's just it, she has called them. But when they told her you'd moved to California, she became convinced it was some kind of cover story. She thinks you're mentally ill, that you've had some kind of breakdown and are living on the streets or in a shelter somewhere, unable to take care of yourself. The irony was staggering. Victoria, who had publicly declared me an embarrassment, was now so consumed with finding me that she couldn't accept the simple truth that I'd moved on to a better life without her. Have you told her that's not the case? I've tried. I've shown her the social media posts from your school in Carmel, the pictures of you with your students, the articles in the local paper about your teaching methods, but she says those could be fake, that someone could be impersonating you online. Why would anyone impersonate a retired teacher from Cedar Falls? That's what I keep asking, but she has an answer for everything. She's created this elaborate conspiracy theory, where you've either been kidnapped by people who are using your identity, or you've had a complete mental breakdown and are being manipulated by strangers. I walked back to my cottage and sat down heavily in my favorite armchair. Victoria's obsession with finding me was beginning to sound like something that required professional help. Jonathan, what exactly do you want from me? I want you to make contact with her. You don't have to reconcile, you don't have to forgive her, but could you just let her know you're alive and well? Maybe send a photo or make a video call so she can see for herself that you're okay? And then what? She goes back to her life and pretends I don't exist, which is what she wanted in the first place? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Wilson, I need to tell you something else. Victoria is pregnant. The words hit me like a physical blow. Victoria was going to have a baby. I was going to be a grandmother, assuming I lived long enough and our relationship ever healed enough for me to meet my grandchild. She's about 12 weeks along, Jonathan continued. We found out right after Christmas. We were so excited at first, but then Victoria became convinced that she needed to find you before the baby was born. She says she can't be a mother while her own mother is missing. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible situation settling on my shoulders. Victoria was pregnant, and apparently using her condition to justify her obsession with finding me. But I knew my daughter well enough to understand what was really happening. She wasn't worried about me, she was worried about what my absence said about her. Being pregnant had probably triggered all sorts of questions from Jonathan's family and their social circle. Where was her mother? Why wasn't I involved in baby preparations? How could a grandmother-to-be simply disappear without explanation? Victoria's carefully constructed image as Mrs. Jonathan Whitmore was being complicated by the inconvenient reality that her embarrassing mother had vanished. Jonathan, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Has Victoria ever acknowledged that her speech at the rehearsal dinner was cruel? Has she ever admitted that her words might have driven me away? Another long pause. She says you misunderstood her. She says she was just making a joke about typical mother-daughter dynamics, and that you took it too personally. A joke, that's what she says. She insists that everyone at the rehearsal dinner knew she was just being playful, and that your reaction was completely disproportionate to what actually happened. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Even now, even pregnant, and supposedly desperate to reconcile with me, Victoria couldn't acknowledge the cruelty of what she'd done. She was still rewriting history to make herself the victim of my unreasonable sensitivity. Has she told you what she said that night? The exact words? She's told me her version. She says she made some lighthearted comments about your photography hobby and your tendency to share childhood stories. Jonathan, that's not what happened. Your wife stood in front of 300 people and called me the most embarrassing thing that had ever happened to her. She apologized to your guests for my behavior, my clothes, my questions, my very existence. She said she'd spent her adult life learning to apologize for where she came from, and that marrying you would finally free her from having to make excuses for her family's limitations. I could hear Jonathan's sharp intake of breath. She didn't tell me that. She ended her speech by saying that once she became Mrs. Jonathan Whitmore, she could finally stop being embarrassed by her family. 300 people heard her say those words, Jonathan. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a joke taken out of context. It was a deliberate, calculated rejection of everything I am and everything I gave her. The silence stretched between us for nearly a minute. Mrs. Wilson, I had no idea. The way Victoria described it, it sounded like a minor comment that you'd blown out of proportion. Your wife is very good at rewriting history to suit her needs. She spent 8 months telling people I'm missing because she can't admit that I left because of how she treated me. Admitting the truth would require her to take responsibility for the consequences of her actions, and Victoria has never been good at that. What should I do? I looked around my cottage, at the life I'd built that was peaceful and fulfilling and entirely my own. I thought about my students, who would be excited to share their reading progress with me tomorrow. I thought about my colleagues, who valued my experience and respected my opinions. I thought about the community I joined, where people saw me as an asset rather than an embarrassment. You should tell your wife the truth. Tell her that you spoke to me, that I'm living in California, that I'm healthy and happy, and have no intention of returning to Cedar Falls. Tell her that I know about the pregnancy and I wish you both well, but that her behavior at the rehearsal dinner ended our relationship permanently. She's not going to accept that. Then that's Victoria's problem to solve, not mine. I spent 30 years prioritizing her needs over my own well-being. I'm not going to do that anymore, even if she's pregnant. But Mrs. Wilson, what about the baby? Don't you want to be part of your grandchild's life? The question I'd been dreading. Of course I wanted to know my grandchild. Of course I wanted to be the kind of grandmother who spoiled babies and told stories, and passed down family traditions. But I also knew that any relationship with Victoria's child would come with the price of accepting Victoria's treatment of me, of pretending that her cruelty hadn't happened, of allowing myself to be diminished and controlled for the sake of family peace. Jonathan, if Victoria wants me in her child's life, she knows exactly what she needs to do. She needs to acknowledge what she said at your rehearsal dinner, apologize sincerely for the pain she caused, and demonstrate that she's genuinely changed her attitude toward me. Until that happens, any contact between us would be harmful for everyone involved, including the baby. What if she doesn't do those things? Then she'll raise her child the same way she was raised, with love and support and every opportunity to succeed. The difference is that her child won't have a grandmother who's willing to accept disrespect and cruelty for the sake of maintaining a relationship. After I hung up, I sat in my cottage as darkness fell over Carmel, thinking about the baby that was growing inside Victoria. My grandchild, who would probably never know me, who would grow up hearing carefully edited stories about the grandmother who had mysteriously disappeared before they were born. It should have broken my heart, and in some ways it did. But it also confirmed that I'd made the right choice in leaving. Victoria was using her pregnancy the same way she'd used everything else in her life as leverage to get what she wanted without having to give anything in return. She wanted me back in her life, but only on her terms, only if I agreed to pretend that her cruelty hadn't happened. 3 days later, Margaret called with an update that didn't surprise me. Eleanor, Victoria showed up at my office again yesterday. She's demanding that I give her your exact address in California. She says she's going to drive out there to see you whether you want her to or not. What did you tell her? I told her the same thing I've told her for 8 months. I cannot and will not share your contact information without your explicit permission. But Eleanor, she seemed different this time. More desperate, more unstable. Jonathan told me about the pregnancy. That explains some of it. She kept talking about how she needs her mother, how she can't have a baby without you there to help her. But when I suggested she might want to examine why you left in the first place, she became very agitated. Still insisting it was all a misunderstanding? Worse than that. Now she's claiming that you've been manipulated by someone in California, that you're being held against your will by people who are preventing you from contacting your family. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. Victoria's delusions were becoming more elaborate, more divorced from reality. Rather than facing the simple truth that her actions had consequences, she was constructing increasingly complex explanations that allowed her to remain blameless. Margaret, I need to ask you something. Do you think Victoria is mentally ill, or is this just an extreme version of her usual manipulation tactics? Margaret was quiet for a moment. I think she's genuinely convinced herself that her version of events is true. Whether that's mental illness or just an inability to face reality, I can't say. But Eleanor, I'm concerned about what she might do if she becomes convinced that you're in danger. What do you mean? I mean, she might involve law enforcement. She might file a missing person report claiming you've been kidnapped or are being held against your will. She has enough social media documentation of her search efforts to make it look like a legitimate case. The thought sent a chill through me. Victoria could potentially turn my peaceful life in Carmel into a media circus, bringing police and reporters and social workers to investigate her claims that I was being held captive by my own choice to live independently. Can she do that? Even though you've confirmed I'm alive and well? She could try. It would probably be quickly resolved once investigators spoke to you directly, but it could cause significant disruption to your life in the meantime. I thought about my students, who trusted me to provide stability in their educational experience. I thought about Dr. Martinez and my colleagues, who had welcomed me into their community. I thought about the reputation I'd built in Carmel as a dedicated teacher and reliable friend. A police investigation into claims that I was being held against my will could destroy everything I'd worked to build. What do you recommend? I think you might need to consider making some kind of contact with Victoria. Not to reconcile, necessarily, but to document clearly and publicly that you're living your life by choice. Maybe a video call with witnesses present, something that would make it impossible for her to claim you're being coerced. Margaret, if I do that, if I give Victoria any contact at all, she'll interpret it as an opening. She'll assume that I'm willing to negotiate, that she can gradually work her way back into my life without ever acknowledging what she did. I understand your concern, but the alternative might be worse. If she involves law enforcement, if she creates a public spectacle, you could end up with much less control over the situation. That evening, I walked along the beach near my cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The beauty of my surroundings felt almost surreal compared to the ugly complications Victoria was creating from 3,000 miles away. I thought about the life I'd built in Carmel, how perfect it felt, how much it suited the person I discovered I could be when I wasn't constantly worried about disappointing someone. I thought about my students, who looked forward to seeing me every day, who trusted me to help them overcome their challenges. I thought about the peace I'd found, the sense of purpose, the simple joy of living without fear of criticism or judgment. Victoria was threatening all of that. Not intentionally, perhaps, but her inability to accept responsibility for her actions was creating a situation that could destroy the sanctuary I'd created for myself. By the time I returned to my cottage, I'd made a decision. I would make contact with Victoria, but it would be entirely on my terms. I would document clearly that I was living independently by choice, but I would also make it absolutely clear that her behavior at the rehearsal dinner had permanently ended our relationship. I called Margaret the next morning with my plan. I want you to set up a video call with Victoria. You'll be present as a witness, and I want everything recorded. I'll confirm that I'm alive, well, and living in California by choice. But I'll also tell her exactly why I left, and exactly what it would take for me to consider any future contact. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? Once you open that door, it might be hard to close again. I'm not opening a door, Margaret, I'm closing one. Permanently. Victoria needs to hear from me directly that her actions have consequences she can't manipulate or explain away. And if she continues to pursue me after that, then I'll know she's genuinely unstable, rather than just extremely selfish. Margaret arranged the call for the following Friday afternoon. I spent the week preparing what I wanted to say, writing down key points so I wouldn't be swayed by emotion, or Victoria's inevitable attempts to redirect the conversation. When Friday arrived, I positioned myself in my cottage living room, with the ocean visible through the window behind me. I wanted Victoria to see clearly that I was in a beautiful place, that I was well-dressed and healthy-looking, that I was obviously living by choice rather than being held captive. Margaret's face appeared on my laptop screen first, calling from her office in Cedar Falls. Eleanor, are you ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, you control this conversation. If Victoria becomes abusive or tries to manipulate you, you can end the call at any time. A moment later, Victoria's face appeared in a second window on my screen. 8 months after the rehearsal dinner, she looked terrible. Her hair was unkempt, her face was pale and drawn, and her eyes had the wild intensity of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. The confident, polished woman who had humiliated me in front of 300 people was gone, replaced by someone who looked desperate and unhinged. Mom? Victoria's voice cracked as she said the word. Oh my God, Mom, where are you? Are you okay? Who is that behind you? Hello, Victoria. I'm fine. I'm in my home in California, where I've been living and working for the past 8 months. California? But Mom, why haven't you called me? I've been so worried. I've been looking everywhere for you. I took a deep breath and consulted my notes. Victoria, I'm going to explain exactly why I left Cedar Falls and why I haven't contacted you. I need you to listen without interrupting. Mom? You look so thin. Are you eating enough? Are those people taking care of you? If someone is making you say these things. Victoria, stop. No one is making me say anything. I'm a 62-year-old woman living independently in a cottage provided by the school where I teach. I have students who depend on me, colleagues who respect me, and friends who value my company. I've never been happier or more fulfilled in my life. Victoria's face crumpled. But Mom, I need you. I'm pregnant and I don't know how to be a mother without you helping me. Congratulations on your pregnancy. I hope you and Jonathan will be very happy. That's it? That's all you have to say? Mom, I'm going to have your grandchild, and you're acting like you don't even care. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. The emotional manipulation that Victoria had used successfully on me for years. But 8 months of independence had given me clarity about our relationship that I'd never had before. Victoria, I care very much. But caring doesn't mean I'm willing to pretend that what happened at your rehearsal dinner didn't matter. What happened at my rehearsal dinner? Mom, you left my wedding because you got upset about something I said. Everyone has been asking me about you, and I've had to make excuses for your behavior. I looked directly into the camera, speaking slowly and clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. Victoria, you stood in front of 300 people and called me the most embarrassing thing that had ever happened to you. You apologized to your guests for my behavior, my clothes, and my existence. You said that you'd spent your adult life learning to apologize for where you came from, and that marrying Jonathan would finally free you from having to make excuses for your family's limitations. Victoria's face went white. Mom, that's not… I didn't mean… You meant every word. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't taken out of context, and it wasn't a misunderstanding. You used your wedding as a platform to publicly reject everything I am and everything I gave you. But Mom, I was nervous. I was trying to be funny. You were trying to distance yourself from your embarrassing background in front of people whose approval you wanted. You succeeded. You got exactly what you asked for. A life without your embarrassing mother. Victoria started crying, the kind of dramatic sobbing she'd used as a child when she wanted to avoid consequences for her behavior. Mom, please come home. I'll apologize, I'll make it right, I need you. No, Victoria, you don't need me. You needed me when you were a child, and I was there. You needed me when you wanted to go to private school, and I worked 3 jobs to pay for it. You needed me when you wanted to go to Northwestern, and I took out loans I'm still paying off. You needed me when you wanted a house, and I gave you one free and clear. I paused, watching her face as the reality of what I was saying sank in. But what you've never needed is to respect me, to appreciate what I sacrificed for you, or to treat me with basic human dignity. And I no longer need to accept disrespect and cruelty for the sake of maintaining a relationship with someone who sees me as an embarrassment. Mom, please. I've changed my will, Victoria. Everything I own is going to charity when I die. The house you destroyed with debt, the savings I accumulated through years of sacrifice, the life insurance policy your father left, all of it will go to help people who might actually appreciate it. Victoria's crying stopped abruptly. You can't do that. That money is supposed to be mine. And there it was. The real reason for her frantic search, her claims of worry and love. Victoria hadn't been looking for me out of genuine concern. She'd been looking for me because she'd discovered that her inheritance was in jeopardy. That money was supposed to be yours when you were the daughter I thought I'd raised. The daughter who loved and respected her mother, who appreciated the sacrifices that had been made for her, who would never publicly humiliate the woman who gave her everything. But I do love you, Mom. I do appreciate everything you did for me. No, Victoria, you don't. If you loved and appreciated me, you never would have said what you said at that rehearsal dinner. And if you truly regretted it, you would have acknowledged your cruelty instead of spending 8 months insisting that I'm the one who overreacted. Margaret spoke up for the first time during our conversation. Victoria, your mother has made her position very clear. She's living independently by choice, she's mentally and physically healthy, And she's not being coerced or manipulated by anyone. The search can end now. Victoria looked between Margaret and me, her face cycling through emotions I recognized from her childhood. Anger that she wasn't getting what she wanted, calculation as she tried to figure out a new approach, and finally a cold hardness that appeared when she realized manipulation wasn't going to work. "Fine," she said, her voice suddenly steady. "If this is how you want it to be, Mom, then this is how it will be. But don't expect me to keep pretending that I care about a mother who abandoned her pregnant daughter over hurt feelings." The mask had slipped completely. Victoria was no longer the desperate, worried daughter. She was revealing herself as the woman who had always existed underneath the performance. The woman who saw relationships as transactions and love as leverage. "Goodbye, Victoria," I said quietly. "I hope you find the happiness you've been looking for." I ended the call and sat back in my chair, feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. The conversation had confirmed everything I'd suspected about Victoria's motivations and character. She'd been looking for me not out of love or concern, but because my absence was complicating her life and threatening her inheritance. Margaret called me back immediately. "Eleanor, are you all right?" "I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine." That conversation confirmed that I made the right choice in leaving. Victoria seemed pretty angry at the end there. Victoria has always been angry when she doesn't get what she wants. The difference is that I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my peace of mind to manage her emotions. "Do you think this will end her search for you?" I looked out my window at the ocean, at the life I'd built that was beautiful and meaningful and entirely my own. "Margaret, I think Victoria will probably try a few more tactics. She might involve law enforcement. She might hire more private investigators. She might even show up in Carmel uninvited. But she's lost the ability to manipulate me, and without that, she has no real power over my life." "What will you do if she does show up?" "I'll handle it the same way I've handled everything else since leaving Cedar Falls. On my own terms, in my own way, without sacrificing my well-being for the sake of someone else's comfort." That night, I walked along the beach and thought about the grandchild I would probably never meet. It should have filled me with regret, but instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. Some relationships are too toxic to maintain, even when they involve people we love. Some prices are too high to pay, even for the privilege of being a grandmother. Victoria had made her choice 8 months ago when she decided to publicly humiliate me for her own social advantage. I had made mine when I decided that my dignity was worth more than her approval. The consequences of those choices were unfolding exactly as they should, and I was finally strong enough to live with them. 6 weeks after my video call with Victoria, I was helping my student Marcus practice his multiplication tables when Dr. Martinez knocked on my classroom door. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I'd worked with her long enough to recognize the tension around her eyes. "Eleanor, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I asked Marcus to continue working on his math worksheet and stepped into the hallway with Dr. Martinez. She closed the door behind us and led me toward her office. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. "We've had some visitors today, 2 police officers from the Cedar Falls Police Department. They're investigating what they called a welfare check request filed by your daughter." My stomach dropped. Despite our video call, despite Margaret's confirmation that I was living freely by choice, Victoria had followed through on her threat to involve law enforcement. "What kind of welfare check?" "According to the officers, your daughter filed a report claiming that you might be suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and that you could be vulnerable to financial exploitation by the school or community members here in Carmel." The audacity was breathtaking. Victoria had twisted our conversation into evidence that I was mentally incompetent, probably using my decision to change my will as proof that I was being manipulated by strangers. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth. That you're one of our most capable and respected teachers. That you moved here voluntarily for a new position. And that you've shown absolutely no signs of mental decline or exploitation." Dr. Martinez paused. "But Eleanor, they want to interview you directly. They're waiting in my office." I followed Dr. Martinez down the hallway, my mind racing. Victoria's latest tactic was more sophisticated than I'd expected. By involving police from Cedar Falls rather than local authorities, she was probably hoping to create an official record that would support her claims about my mental state. The two officers were sitting in Dr. Martinez's office, both middle-aged men who looked uncomfortable with their assignment. The younger one stood when I entered, extending his hand. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Officer David Chen, and this is Officer Robert Martinez with the Cedar Falls Police Department. We're here because your daughter, Victoria Whitmore, filed a welfare check request. She's concerned about your well-being." "I understand. How can I help you?" Officer Chen consulted his notebook. "Mrs. Whitmore claims that you disappeared from Cedar Falls approximately 8 months ago without telling anyone where you were going. She says this behavior is completely out of character for you, and she's concerned that you might be suffering from cognitive decline." Officer Chen, I didn't disappear. I moved to California for a new teaching position. I informed my lawyer of my whereabouts. I transferred my pension benefits, and I've been working at this school since September. There's a complete paper trail documenting my relocation. "We understand that, ma'am. But Mrs. Whitmore also claims that you've made significant changes to your estate planning, giving away assets to strangers rather than family members. She believes this could indicate that you're being manipulated or coerced." I sat down across from the officers, recognizing that this conversation would determine whether Victoria's harassment would escalate or end. "Officers, I changed my will because my daughter publicly humiliated me at her wedding rehearsal, calling me an embarrassment in front of 300 guests. Her behavior made it clear that she doesn't value our relationship or appreciate the sacrifices I made for her education and opportunities. I decided to leave my assets to charitable organizations that would put them to better use." Officer Martinez made notes while Officer Chen continued his questions. "Mrs. Whitmore mentioned that you've had limited contact with family and friends since moving to California. She's worried that someone here might be isolating you. I haven't contacted Victoria because she treated me with deliberate cruelty, and I have no desire to subject myself to further abuse. As for friends, I've made many new ones here. Dr. Martinez, would you mind if these officers spoke with some of my colleagues?" Dr. Martinez nodded. "Of course. Eleanor is well-liked and respected by everyone on our staff. She's also become involved in several community organizations." Officer Chen looked relieved. "That would be helpful, if you don't mind us taking up more of your time." Over the next hour, the officers interviewed 3 of my fellow teachers, 2 parents of my students, and the director of the literacy program where I volunteered on weekends. Each conversation painted the same picture. I was mentally sharp, socially engaged, and clearly living independently by choice. Finally, Officer Chen closed his notebook. "Mrs. Wilson, based on our interviews and observations, we see no evidence that you're being exploited, coerced, or suffering from cognitive decline. We'll file a report stating that you're living voluntarily in California and appear to be in good physical and mental health. What happens with Victoria's complaint? The case will be closed as unfounded. However, if Mrs. Whitmore continues to file reports or attempts to involve other agencies, she could potentially face charges for filing false police reports." After the officers left, Dr. Martinez and I sat in her office discussing the implications of Victoria's latest escalation. "Eleanor, I have to ask, is there any chance your daughter will try other approaches, social services, adult protective services, anything like that?" "It's possible. Victoria is very resourceful when she wants something, and she's clearly not ready to accept that our relationship is over." "Well, you should know that you have the full support of the school and the community here. If anyone else shows up asking questions about your welfare, we'll provide the same information we gave those officers today." I thanked Dr. Martinez and returned to my classroom, where Marcus was still working diligently on his math problems. The normalcy of helping him understand multiplication felt surreal after spending an hour defending my mental competency to police officers. That evening, I called Margaret to update her on the day's events. "Victoria filed a police report? Even after our video call proved you were fine?" "Apparently she's convinced that I'm suffering from dementia and being manipulated by the school community here." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, I think Victoria might be crossing the line into harassment. Filing false police reports, making unfounded allegations about your mental state, these could constitute criminal behavior. What are my options? You could file for a restraining order. With the documentation we have of her behavior, including today's false police report, we'd have a strong case. I considered the possibility. A restraining order would legally prevent Victoria from contacting me or filing further reports, but it would also create a permanent legal record of our estrangement. Any hope of future reconciliation would be definitively ended. Let me think about it. If she tries anything else, I'll definitely pursue that option. Eleanor, there's something else you should know. Victoria's husband, Jonathan, called my office today. He wants to schedule an appointment to discuss the situation. Did he say what he wanted to discuss? Just that he needs legal advice about his wife's behavior. Reading between the lines, I think he's becoming concerned about Victoria's mental state. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria was so convinced that I was mentally unstable that she'd apparently started exhibiting unstable behavior herself, to the point where her own husband was seeking legal counsel. 3 days later, Margaret called with an update on her meeting with Jonathan. Eleanor, I think you need to hear this. Jonathan is considering separating from Victoria. Because of her obsession with finding me? That's part of it. But he says the behavior started before she got pregnant, right after you left Cedar Falls. He describes her as becoming increasingly paranoid and controlling, convinced that everyone is lying to her about your whereabouts. Margaret paused. He also said something interesting about the rehearsal dinner speech. He asked other wedding guests about it, and they confirmed that Victoria's comments about you were much crueler than she'd led him to believe. So he knows she lied about what really happened. More than that, apparently several people told him they were shocked by Victoria's public humiliation of you. Some of Jonathan's family members even mentioned that they felt sorry for you that night. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. It was gratifying to know that others had recognized Victoria's cruelty, but sad that it had taken her husband 8 months to uncover the truth. What kind of legal advice is he seeking? He wants to know about protecting his assets if Victoria continues this escalating behavior. He's concerned that she might do something that results in lawsuits or criminal charges. He's also worried about how her behavior might affect their child. That gave me pause. Jonathan was thinking about the baby, about what kind of environment Victoria was creating for their future family. Margaret, has he asked about the possibility of me having contact with the baby? He did mention it. He said he understands why you've cut off contact with Victoria, but he hopes there might be a way for you to have a relationship with your grandchild that doesn't involve dealing with Victoria directly. That would be complicated. Very complicated, but not impossible, if Victoria were willing to accept certain boundaries. I spent that night walking along the beach, thinking about the grandchild who would be born in a few months. A baby who would grow up in a household where one parent was apparently becoming increasingly unstable, and the other was considering separation. The situation Victoria had created through her cruelty and subsequent obsession was affecting innocent people now. Jonathan, who had seemed like a genuinely good man at their wedding. The baby, who deserved to be born into a stable, loving environment. Even Victoria herself, who was apparently spiraling into behavior that was damaging her marriage and her mental health. But I also knew that returning to Cedar Falls, or allowing Victoria back into my life, wouldn't solve any of these problems. Victoria's issues went deeper than her relationship with me. Her inability to accept responsibility for her actions, her need to control other people's perceptions of reality, her willingness to lie and manipulate to get what she wanted. These weren't problems I could fix by sacrificing my own well-being. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected package in the mail. No return address, but the postmark was from Cedar Falls. Inside was a photo album I'd never seen before, filled with pictures from Victoria's childhood and adolescence. There was Victoria at age 5, missing her front teeth, grinning proudly in her ballet costume before her first recital. Victoria at 8, holding up a blue ribbon from the science fair, her face glowing with achievement. Victoria at 16, dressed for homecoming, looking beautiful and confident and happy. On the last page was a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. Mrs. Wilson, my name is Rebecca Chen. I was Victoria's roommate at Northwestern and her maid of honor. I've been following the situation with Victoria's search for you, and I wanted you to know that many of Victoria's old friends are concerned about her behavior. We remember how proud she used to be of you, how often she talked about your sacrifices and support. The Victoria who gave that speech at her rehearsal dinner isn't the Victoria we went to college with. I thought you might want these photos, because they show the daughter you raised before something changed her. I hope you're doing well. Rebecca. I sat in my cottage looking through the album, remembering the girl Victoria had been before she decided that her background was something to be ashamed of. The child who had hugged me tight after every school play, who had called me at work just to share good news about a test grade, who had written me thank you notes for Christmas gifts even when she was in high school. What had happened to that girl? When had she started seeing me as an embarrassment rather than the person who loved her most in the world? When had she decided that my pride in her achievements was something to be hidden rather than celebrated? I called Margaret the next morning. Margaret, I want to know more about what Jonathan said regarding Victoria's mental state. Do you think she might actually be having some kind of breakdown? It's possible. The behavior he described, the paranoia, the elaborate conspiracy theories about you being held against your will, the inability to accept clear evidence that contradicts her beliefs, these could be signs of mental illness. What if Victoria needs help rather than punishment? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, are you reconsidering the restraining order? I'm reconsidering everything. If Victoria is genuinely mentally ill, if this obsession with finding me is a symptom of something that requires treatment, then maybe the compassionate response is to try to get her help, rather than cutting her off completely. That's very generous of you, but Eleanor, you need to remember that Victoria's mental health isn't your responsibility. You can't sacrifice your own well-being to save someone who has consistently chosen to hurt you. I knew Margaret was right, but I also couldn't shake the image of that 5-year-old girl in the ballet costume, so proud and happy and innocent. Somewhere inside the woman who had humiliated me at her rehearsal dinner was the child I'd loved with my whole heart for 30 years. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Jonathan directly. Mrs. Wilson? I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Jonathan, I understand that you're concerned about Victoria's behavior. I'm calling because I want to understand what's really happening with her. Are you thinking about coming back to Cedar Falls? No, I'm not. But I am thinking about the baby, and about Victoria's well-being. If she's genuinely struggling with mental health issues, maybe there's a way to help her that doesn't require me to accept abuse. Jonathan sighed. Mrs. Wilson, I appreciate your concern, but I think Victoria has gone beyond the point where family intervention would help. She's convinced that you're either dead, kidnapped, or being held against your will. When I show her evidence that you're living freely in California, she accuses me of being part of the conspiracy. Has she seen a doctor? A therapist? I've suggested it, but she refuses. She says the only therapy she needs is for you to come home and admit that you've been manipulated by strangers. The conversation confirmed what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. Victoria's behavior wasn't just stubbornness or manipulation anymore. It had crossed into something that looked like genuine delusion. Jonathan, what's your plan? For the marriage? For the baby? Honestly? I'm considering filing for separation after the baby is born. I can't live with someone who's creating this level of chaos and stress. And I can't raise a child in this environment. What about custody? That would depend on Victoria's mental state at the time. If she continues down this path, if she can't distinguish between reality and her conspiracy theories, then I'd have to seek primary custody for the baby's safety. I hung up feeling deeply sad for all of us. Victoria's cruelty at the rehearsal dinner had set off a chain of events that was destroying multiple lives. Her marriage was falling apart, her mental health was deteriorating, and her child would be born into instability and conflict. But I also recognized that none of this was my fault, and none of it was my responsibility to fix. Victoria had created this situation through her choices and her refusal to accept accountability for her actions. I couldn't save her from the consequences, especially not at the cost of my own well-being. A month later, I received a call from Dr. Martinez with news that confirmed my worst fears about Victoria's escalating behavior. Eleanor, we've had an incident. A woman matching your daughter's description showed up at the school yesterday claiming to be conducting a welfare check on you. When our security guard asked for identification, she became belligerent and had to be escorted off the property. Victoria was here. In Carmel, the woman claimed to be from the California Department of Social Services, but when we called to verify her credentials, we discovered that no such investigation was authorized. The description our guard gave matches the photos you showed us of your daughter. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. Victoria had traveled 3,000 miles to confront me in person, and she'd done so by impersonating a government official. Did she try to make contact with me directly? Not at the school, but Eleanor, you should be aware that she might try to approach you at home or in the community. I've notified local police about the incident, and they've agreed to increase patrols in your neighborhood. I thanked Dr. Martinez and immediately called Margaret to update her on this latest escalation. Eleanor, Victoria impersonating a government official is a serious crime. Combined with the false police reports, you now have grounds for criminal charges in addition to a restraining order. Do you think she's still in California? I don't know, but you need to take precautions. Don't go anywhere alone, and if you see her, don't engage. Call the police immediately. That evening, I sat in my cottage with the curtains drawn, feeling like a prisoner in the sanctuary I'd created for myself. Victoria's obsession had followed me across the country, threatening to destroy the peace and security I'd worked so hard to build. But as I sat there, I realized something important. I wasn't the same woman who had fled Cedar Falls 8 months ago. I wasn't the person who would accept abuse for the sake of maintaining a relationship, who would sacrifice her own well-being to manage someone else's emotions. The woman Victoria was hunting no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth, someone who wouldn't be intimidated or manipulated into accepting treatment she didn't deserve. The next morning, I called Margaret with my final decision. I want to file criminal charges against Victoria for impersonating a government official, filing false police reports, and harassment. I also want a restraining order that prohibits her from coming within 500 miles of me or my workplace. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? Once we file criminal charges, there's no going back. Victoria could face jail time. Margaret, Victoria made her choices when she decided to publicly humiliate me, then doubled down by lying about what happened, filing false reports, and now impersonating officials to hunt me down. I've given her every opportunity to accept responsibility and move on with her life. Instead, she's chosen to escalate her behavior to the point where it's affecting innocent people and threatening my safety. What about the baby? What about being a grandmother? I looked out my window at the Pacific Ocean, at the life I'd built that was meaningful and fulfilling and entirely my own. The baby will be better off with a grandmother who models self-respect and healthy boundaries than with one who accepts abuse for the sake of family peace. If Victoria ever gets the help she needs, if she ever becomes capable of genuine remorse and change, then maybe we can revisit the situation. But I won't sacrifice my safety and sanity on the hope that she might someday become the person I thought I'd raised. Margaret filed the paperwork that afternoon. Within a week, Victoria had been served with both criminal charges and a restraining order. According to Margaret, she'd been arrested at a hotel in Monterey, just 40 miles from Carmel, apparently planning another attempt to confront me. Jonathan filed for separation 2 days later. The local newspaper in Cedar Falls ran a small article about Victoria's arrest, describing it as part of an ongoing harassment case. I didn't read the article myself, but Margaret told me that it mentioned Victoria's pregnancy and her husband's separation filing, painting a picture of a woman whose life was falling apart due to her own poor choices. I felt sadness for the grandchild I would probably never meet, for the daughter I'd loved who had become someone I couldn't recognize, for the family that had been destroyed by cruelty and pride and an inability to accept responsibility. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with my decisions. Victoria had taught me an invaluable lesson through her cruelty. She'd shown me that I didn't have to accept disrespect from anyone, even people I loved. She'd forced me to discover that I was capable of building a life that belonged entirely to me, that I could find meaning and purpose and joy without anyone's permission or approval. The woman who had called me embarrassing had inadvertently set me free to become the person I was always meant to be. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded through Margaret's office. The return address showed it was from a women's correctional facility in Northern California, where Victoria was serving a 6-month sentence for her various charges. I almost threw the letter away without reading it, but something made me open it. Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but the counselors here say I need to write to the people I've hurt as part of my treatment program. I've been diagnosed with something called narcissistic personality disorder with delusional features. The doctors say that my behavior toward you was abusive, and that I created elaborate justifications to avoid taking responsibility for my actions. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness, or to try to get you to visit me. I'm writing because I finally understand what I did to you, and I'm horrified by it. The speech I gave at my rehearsal dinner was cruel and calculated. I was trying to impress Jonathan's family and friends by distancing myself from what I saw as my inferior background. I used you as a target to make myself look better, and that was inexcusable. I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything. I know that I destroyed our relationship and hurt you in ways that can't be undone. I know that I've lost the right to be your daughter, and that my child will grow up without knowing their grandmother because of my choices. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that you weren't the problem I was. You weren't embarrassing. I was embarrassed by my own insecurities and took them out on the person who loved me most. Jonathan has filed for divorce. He's seeking full custody of the baby, and honestly, he should get it. I'm not capable of being a good mother right now, maybe not ever. I hope you're happy in California. I hope you've found peace. You deserve all the good things that I was too selfish and broken to appreciate when I had the chance to be part of your life. I love you, Mom. I know I don't have the right to say that anymore, but it's true. I love you, and I'm sorry for everything. Victoria. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for the woman Victoria had become. Relief that she'd finally acknowledged the truth about what she'd done. And a deep gratitude that I'd been strong enough to refuse to accept her abuse. The letter confirmed what I'd suspected for months. Victoria's problems went far deeper than our relationship. Her inability to accept responsibility, her need to manipulate and control, her willingness to hurt the people who loved her most. These were symptoms of a serious mental health condition that required professional treatment. I was glad she was getting help, but I also knew that her acknowledgement of the truth had come too late to rebuild what she'd destroyed. Some words can't be taken back, some damage can't be undone, some relationships can't be salvaged, even with genuine remorse. I wrote her back, once, a brief note expressing hope that she would continue with her treatment, and wishing her well in building a healthier future. But I made it clear that while I appreciated her honesty, it didn't change my decision to maintain distance between us. The grandchild was born 3 months later. A little girl named Emma Rose. Jonathan sent a photo through Margaret, along with a note saying that if I ever wanted to establish a relationship with Emma when she was older, he would be open to that possibility. I put the photo on my refrigerator next to pictures of my students, and kept the door open to that future possibility. Maybe someday, when Emma was old enough to understand complicated family dynamics, we could build a relationship that existed independently of her relationship with her mother. But for now, I focused on the life I'd built in Carmel. My students, who continued to thrive under my guidance. My colleagues, who had become genuine friends. My cottage by the sea, where I'd learned to find happiness that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or appreciation. Victoria had called me embarrassing, but she'd inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life. She'd forced me to discover that I was strong enough to live alone, confident enough to start over, and valuable enough to demand respect from the people in my life. At 63, I'd learned that it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to walk away from relationships that diminish you. It's never too late to build a life that reflects your worth, rather than someone else's opinion of you. Victoria had wanted me to disappear from her life, and I had, but in disappearing from hers, I'd finally appeared in my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.